as Simon mentioned, this is part of the Riverwoods initiative that we're putting on this webinar. And in particular, it's in response to the work of the Riverwoods Investment Readiness Pioneers project and the applicants that have taken an interest in applying for into that project. And there's been a particular interest around carbon aspects of restoration projects. And so we thought this webinar would be useful to provide a little bit of information and an opportunity to ask questions around that. So just to give you a quick introduction, most of you will be familiar with this already, but the Riverwoods initiative itself, a partnership initiative, Scotland-wide ambition to create a network of thriving riverbank woodlands and healthy river systems across Scotland. And we are seeing this as quite an important agenda for Scotland, given that Scotland has around 125,000 kilometres of rivers, and it provides a natural nature network for biodiversity, to connect biodiversity across different parts of Scotland. Improving the riparian habitat, so that's the riverbank woodland zones, has the potential, in our view, to create some quite transformational change that will deliver significant benefits of wildlife and people. But crucially, this is not going to happen purely with government funding or philanthropic funding. We need to leverage in private investment. We need to develop commercial propositions that generate revenue streams for the ecosystem services that are provided by restoring riverwood zones around Scotland. So that's part of what our agenda is under Riverwoods. And just to give you a sense of the partners, quite a number of different partners, statutory, environmental agencies, ENGOs, and we also have a number of business partners now coming on board as well. So that gives you a small sense of the range of partnerships that are actively involved in the Riverwoods initiative. We also have a number of subgroups that are taking specific aspects of the Riverwoods agenda forward. We have a science group, we have a finance group and a delivery group, and the Riverwoods Investment Pioneers initiative, of which this webinar is part, is an action taken forward with the finance aspects of this project. So just a quick note about river woodlands. This includes the trees and woods in, next to and near rivers, burns and lochs. Clearly, there's an element here of recycling nutrients, storing carbon, and regulating water flow. And the storing carbon aspect is something which we're hoping to bring out in the webinar today in particular. The river woodlands, many different types of woods, a few are listed here. Riparian woodland is, of course, the main focus, woodlands found along the bank of streams, rivers or lochs. But there's also floodplain woodland, gorge woodlands, woodland buffer strips, and of course, man-made structures such as leaky dams, which involve large wood material. So all of these are relevant to the impact of riparian restoration and all within scope of this project. So the Riverwoods Investment Readiness Pioneers initiative itself, which is a project within the overall Riverwoods umbrella, is a specific part of the project, which is about providing an opportunity for communities, landowners and other stakeholders to work together so that we can identify projects that have the potential to be financed using more commercial mechanisms, basically in order to generate revenue streams. And the Riverwoods Investment Readiness Pioneers is almost like a pre-investment readiness application opportunity where you can get some resource in to help you to develop your thinking around potential projects that could eventually become investment ready. So unlike a number of other initiatives that have been established to date, this is trying to target early thinking and give you an opportunity, even if you don't feel as though you have all the ingredients together yet, give you an opportunity to start with your idea, support you on that journey, and give you the opportunity to get some resource in to develop your thinking at a very early stage. And so there's different levels of support available for anyone with an interest. We have, of course, the online resources on the riverwoods.org.uk website, events and workshops such as this one. But we also are providing one-to-one support and mentoring, particularly through one of our colleagues, Dan Hurd, who's been involved in setting up a number of the river catchment restoration initiatives that took place in England with DEFRA and support. So range of expertise available. Of course, we are also drawing on the expertise of the Woodland Trust and the Tweed Forum for this webinar in terms of the carbon aspects, but there are a number of other people that are providing one-to-one support and input into supporting early stage projects on their Riverwoods journey. As part of this project, we are planning to work with a range of communities to select projects. So the idea here is not just to pick projects based on a small panel, but also to try and give an opportunity for the wider general public and wider communities to have an input into the selection process as well. So we want to inspire a wider sense of interest in Riverwoods as well. So as part of that, we have just today launched a platform which is available on a platform called Console, which is used for participatory budgeting by local authorities. And we're going to be using that as a way to showcase potential projects. So those that apply to the Riverwoods Investment Readiness Pioneers are essentially submitting a project to be showcased on this platform, which will then be viewed by the general public. And there will be an opportunity for the general public to ask questions, make comments. There will also be an opportunity to refine these proposals in response to some of these comments. And then eventually we hope that we will be able to select 5 projects from this, who will then provide further advice and support, including grants between £4,000 and £5,000 to work on the business plan for developing the investment readiness of these projects. So it's really at that early stage. Once we do get those 2 projects, once we do get those business plans together, we will then select 2 of those to be taken forward to be provided with up to £125,000 of further investment readiness funding and support. And it is that phase where the projects that are part of that will be expected to be working out contracts, memorandums of understandings, the investment vehicles and things like that, and identifying buyers. So again, just to reiterate that what we're trying to do with this initiative is to target the really early stage of thinking and project development, not those that have already got a project necessarily and are ready to start attracting investors. So just to give you a sense of the outline, we're currently looking for submissions by October the 31st. So this will be submissions to the online console platform that I mentioned. And then during the month of November, the community will have an opportunity to review projects and vote for them. And we will use that as a basis for shortlisting those 4 or 5 projects that will be eligible for funding to develop their business plans. And then by February next year, the idea is that these business plans will be ready, and then we'll use that as a basis for selecting 2 projects that could then be candidates for the big prize of 125k of investment readiness funding. And that funding, of course, is to get projects to the stage where they're ready to start doing delivery, perhaps, hopefully, by June 2024 or earlier. So that's the overall flow of what we're looking at. And we thought that with this particular session, it might be helpful to just talk a little bit more about the carbon aspects of the project. But of course, if you have any further questions about the Riverwoods Investment Readiness Pioneers project, I'll be on hand to answer them as well if you require. Although we are going to try and focus a bit more on the carbon aspects that James and Russ are going to go through. So I'm going to pass over now to James and Russ. I'm not sure who's going first. Is it James? Okay. And I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Ruchir. I hope everyone can see this. We have a little technical hitch in terms of getting this full screen, but we'll push on through this. I've got the sort of dry end of the stick today. I don't have any wonderful super duper landscape pictures of Scotland and riparian woodlands. Mine is fairly dry. And what I'm going to do is just go through the Woodland Carbon Code itself. We can't really have a webinar on understanding the carbon finance without actually understanding the mechanics of the carbon code. So that's basically what I'll be doing. I've been the carbon manager with Woodland Trust for the past 2 years, developing our own carbon offer. and using that to assist developments up and down the country. So the two objectives that I have are just to explain what the Woodland Carbon Code is and to outline the timelines that are involved. So what is the Woodland Carbon Code? Well, the Carbon Code is essentially a big calculator, a calculator that basically takes all the information about your development, how big it is, where it is, type of soil it's being planted on, the techniques being used, the species being used. And it basically uses that information to give you a number of carbon units that development will produce over a given period of time. Now, as an ex-civil servant, I've seen some dry pieces of text that have been produced, but this one's really quite approachable and really quite good. And it is actually available as a PDF at that address there, and we can share that later.
James, I'm not seeing your screen. I'm not sure if everyone else can see your screen or not. Is it just me?
No, I can't see the screen either.
Can't see it? Well, I'll tell you what, basically what we'll do is we'll get to, why don't we take off Russ? Would you want to go first, and we'll develop a way of getting this through. I'll maybe send this through to you, Simon, if that's okay.
If you want to email me the presentation, yeah, we can do it that way.
So Russ, do you want to kick in?
Yeah, I can pick up. Just bear with me when I share the screen here. Can everybody see that, hopefully? Please let me know if not.
Yes.
It should all be there. Okay, yeah, apologies for the slight technical hit. James's side, I'll just drop in here. So forgive us because there was a sort of framing of this was supposedly coming, but hopefully we'll get through it. Yeah, so who am I? I know there's a lot of people on here who I've met before, and probably some of you will have heard this as well. Various presentations I've done before, so we're going to have a quick run through of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and then how we use the available carbon funds to deliver practical work on the ground. So I'm a project manager with the Tweed Forum. My primary aim is to increase riparian woodland within the Tweed catchment and facilitate others across Scotland to do the same. So I have a split role, but essentially delivering the same thing, which is an increase in riparian and native woodland across Scotland. The aims of the session, just give you a brief rundown of who we are at the Tweed Forum, then sort of very quickly through riparian woodland, why we're doing it, how we use carbon, and a couple of examples. I think we're predominantly Scottish based here, as in Scottish operators operating in Scotland, but I do have one of our first English schemes because we straddle the border. 20% of the Tweed catchment is in England. So if there is anybody that works both sides, or indeed English operators on here, I do have an example just to show you at the end. So who are the Tweed Forum? We basically promote the WISE, it says here, the sustainable use of the whole Tweed catchment through holistic and integrated management and planning. So we do integrated catchment planning, catchment management. And our role in most basic forms is we overcome the barriers to participation within land managers. We try to ensure the right measures are happening in the right place at the right scale. And we're trying to achieve a critical mass involving multiple landowners. And we're trying to hit various agendas. And we deliver that by securing match funding and overseeing all the works. And ultimately, we're trying to achieve multiple benefits at a catchment scale. Where do we sit in this very basic diagram? Essentially, at the top, as we all know, we have policymakers and relevant authorities. at the top, and at the bottom we have people like land managers, farmers, landowners, etc., trying to implement a lot of these regulations. And we sit in the middle. We try and simplify everything, and we try and work with the land managers to build it into their business. So that's about as simple as I can make it to what we do. And why are landowners important? If you've heard me speak before, you'll have seen this slide. Landowners are important because they have most of the management of most of the land, especially in Scotland here. Basically on there, what you need to know is the white areas are the publicly owned land, if you like, and everything else is privately owned. And England has a similar picture. So we need the landowners to deliver improvements on the ground. They are absolutely key to everything we do. They often get sort of forgotten or the last thought in the lines of projects. But they are absolutely key. We need their support, we need their buy-in, we need their commitment, and we're going to have to compromise. You know, I have never delivered a perfect scheme yet. There is always compromise to be had. So, you know, what are we trying to achieve? And this is a slide again, if you've heard me speak to this in before, we're basically trying to increase riparian woodland and beneficial habitat at scale. And to do that, you know, in my opinion, this requires a pragmatic approach. Compromise is key. We need a vision of a protected watercourse. We need the soft skills to get there, technical knowledge of how to deliver it, the financial acumen and expertise to facilitate it, and that's where we're going to concentrate today. We need a, you know, it's helpful that we have an adaptable core model that works. We need to understand the process from start to finish, and ultimately is a collaborative team effort. I don't do this all on my own. We have a team in the back of us and partners all working towards the same aim, which is getting the right tree in the right place for the right reason. And why are we doing it? I'm not going to spend too long here. I'm sure most people on here understand the issues that we're facing at the moment. You know, these are some of the issues that a lot of the watercourses are facing. Water temperature is a big one in Scotland at the moment, especially around the wild sun and the effect that higher water temperatures are having on them. Diffuse pollution, sewage discharge, you can read the list there. You know, these are all aspects and problems that we face every day. I'm sure we all know about them. And then, you know, what are the benefits to improving the riparian habitat? Well, you know, it's again, water temperatures is a big one in Scotland, or one of the bigger ones in Scotland at the moment. Anyhow, you know, trees can provide shade. We can cool the water there. You know, we can increase soil infiltration, reduce nutrient runoff. I'm sure these are all points that everybody's well aware of. And of course, they can also be designed into natural flood management issues to address natural flood management. To address flooding issues through natural management. And you know, we are doing that at scale in the Eddleston catchment here in the Tweed, within the Tweed catchment itself. And the one I suppose that everybody's online for today, and a lot of it, that bottom one there, we can potentially increase value to the land, either that through, you know, having a carbon holding, or potentially green finance, and or you know, nobody knows what's coming down the line in terms of subsidies currently, but there is potential that, you know, we're going to be able to aid and you know, potentially increase value to land for the landowners and the farmers. So what is our delivery model? Again, it's a quick slide. Essentially, the top bit is the most important. We aim to deliver positive riparian enhancement that fits with the landowner business. It's crucial that we've got to build this in with the business. It can't be siloed off. It's got to work for them and is a positive to them, and ensure that the project is delivered at cash neutral or showing a positive return. And we do that through the points delivered below, and I'm sure these presentations will get circulated after, so people can have a look at that. Obviously, the one highlighted in red there is engage third-party funding sources where required. But essentially, we meet landowners, we agree what we can do on the ground, we then design the scheme for them, we work out how to finance that scheme, and then we deliver that on the ground for them to the end of capital phase. And we deliver that at a, as it says at the top, a cash neutral or a positive return. And how do we do that? This is sort of what we're online for here. We've got to blend the finance nowadays, because the forestry grant scheme that we all try and work under when we're delivering woodland, it is not enough. It's not enough for what we do, especially on the riparian sides, which are quite often long, thin, narrow, strips of woodland, it becomes expensive to deliver. So we have to deliver that. And there are mechanisms there. As I say, there is the forestry grant scheme. Theoretically, it's supposed to cover 85% of the capital phases. It doesn't quite get there at all at the moment, especially with the increase in financing prices. We've got agri-environment schemes, but there are also other places you can find money, like under flood alleviation schemes, regional enhancement funds, NRF funds, BCF funds as well as, and then also the larger funding pockets like NHLF, also wind farms and community funds, and right down to donors. Carbon there is highlighted in one, because we'll drop into that in a little bit more detail in the next slide. And then, the future, if you like, is this green financing that everybody's looking at the moment. Ruchir mentioned before the IRP, the Investment Readiness Pioneers project that's running, and Irons that's running. And this is what everybody's looking at, how to bring private finance into our sector to deliver positive enhancement. Currently really the only one on the market, the most accessible anyhow, in the simplest form, is carbon. But on all of this, scale helps. If you have a look at the diagram I think it's on the right of your screen, it might be the left, depending on how you're looking at it. But basically what we're trying to do is we're bringing money in to deliver the trees on the ground, and potentially trying to offer money out, either potentially increased from there. And if we can do that, then we can either show that as return to the landowner, they can do some carbon capture, but potentially for some of the operators that may be on this call, it may offer opportunity to do some circular finance. So if we can put the money in to deliver the product on the ground and bring money out of the other side, via green finance, in this case we're talking carbon, then there is a potential there. In the right situation, we can make that money circular to deliver future projects and keep that momentum going and keep that circular finance occurring to deliver more on the ground. And as I said before, and all of this, if you can get scale, it really helps in terms of balancing up the finance. So where do we sit in all of this? We are, as you saw on the second slide we are the trusted intermediary. We are not the brokers when it comes to carbon. The carbon market is fast, it's a developing marketplace. There's lots of options out there. There are more brokers coming to the market, and we have a close working relationship with Woodland Trust, Forest Carbon, and a few other players. But our job is just to present the options to the landowner, because ultimately these contracts and the responsibility will generally lie with the landowner. So it's for them to make the business decision. Our position is just to open that door, show them the options, and allow them to make the best business decision they can at the time. And we need to build the relationships with the brokers. We need to build the relationships with the landowners, and we present the options. And as I say, we can handhold, we can offer advice, but it is ultimately a business decision made by the landowner. And how do they deal with the potential carbon options and carbon monies available? And I'm going to show you a breakdown of how that looks practically in a minute. But at the moment, in this most basic forms, the landowners can sell everything. They can say, if we're doing a woodland creation scheme with them and they have carbon credits available, they can sell it all up front, take the money and run, kind of thing. But that might be used to aid the cash flow, and that's the example I'll show you in a minute. Or it can be cash flow and profit. They can sell a percentage and retain a percentage. This is sort of in the area. This is the most popular area we work in at the moment. We work with landowners, we develop schemes, and they sell a percentage of their carbon credit up front to make the scheme cash neutral, and then they retain percentage in the hope that either carbon is going to go up, or they may be looking at their own business interest and think, we've got to do some offset in the future, therefore I want that carbon bank available to me. Or, if they don't need it, or the finance stacks up more favorably, then they can retain it all. And, again, along future lines of either having their offset, or they're hoping that carbon prices go up, therefore they'll have more to sell in the future, more profit to make in the future, or future finance around doing offsets, or potentially, green finance. And that may come down the line when the government decides exactly what's going to happen in the future. Again, we'll just drop into a model here. That's our delivery model. That's what we do. And to try and pull all this together in a more graphic form, here's the live scheme that we're running at the moment. This is very classic of what we look at. long, thin schemes. This is a 18-hectare block, but it's very long and thin, so the fencing is expensive. It doesn't stack up financially. This is actually one of 2 blocks that we're doing. Here's the second block on this land, and again, relatively long and thin strips, putting the buffer in. You know, we're interrupting sediment, we're creating shade, trying to improve the water quality. But how does that stack up when it comes to finance? This is basically a budget sheet that goes with it, and hopefully you can all see that. And this is basically just the income at the top, the expenditure at the bottom. And along the bottom we have a cash flow over 5 years. Now I'll just drop on the next slide, which just brings that into more clarity. You'll see there that essentially what we have is £78,000 income and £102,000 expenditure, which gives us a net loss of just over £24,000. And then if you just follow that all along, this is really just a cash flow for income that we get under the forestry grant scheme on the top. We get maintenance payments for 5 years. The first payment is obviously the capital payments drawn down under the FGS, and then we have maintenance payments that go along for 5 years. That gives us a total income for that scheme of £103,000. But our expenditure, this is estimated, of course, because this is live at the moment. Although the capital cost of 102 is pretty fixed, that's not going to move much. Then we, estimate that we have, 5,000 leading down to £1,000 worth of maintenance to do on that site over 5 years, and essentially that gives us £119,000 outlay. So even at the end of year 5, we have a £15,000 deficit that we need to find, because as I say, our delivery model is to deliver this at a cash neutral or positive enhancement, positive position for the landowner. So in this instance, we've gone to a broker. We have asked them to give us some numbers, and I'm simplifying the process here, but yeah, they're essentially saying there is £42,000 of carbon credit available. And the landowner in this instance, although this is not agreed as yet, I think actually it might have been agreed just recently, but he's probably going to sell 60% upfront. That's going to give him a £25,000 income. That basically offsets the initial loss in year 1 and gives them a little bit of profit in the bank. And he's selling them upfront as PIUs. And James will cover this if technical issues are sorted on what PIUs are, which is basically forward selling potential carbon units, carbon storage. And he's going to retain 40% for future offset, either of his own business, because he needs to offset carbon storage somewhere for his own business use, or hopefully that they will convert to WCUs, wooden carbon units in the future, and be sold for a profit. Now obviously markets can go up and down and nobody knows where it's going to go, but that's the likelihood of his decision on here. And as I say, very briefly, I don't think there's many English players on here. This is our first UCO scheme under the English grant scheme. It's obviously not going to win design of the year, but these are the constraints we face with what a landowner needs to get out of his business and other actual physical constraints that we have on this site. Stack that up. The interesting thing to note under the English scheme, which is a lot more financially attractive than the Scottish scheme currently, is that at the end of year 10, because their schemes run over a 10-year period for the financial income, that's actually showing a £22,000 return. But due to, or at least the options that the broker that the client has spoken to, says carbon's still in play on this scheme. But because it's a small scheme and due to the ongoing costs around verification, which we would have covered in the previous slide, and James will catch up on this, he's probably going to sell all this up front because the longer term finance doesn't quite stack up for retaining it. But he may change his mind. But I suspect in this scheme he will sell all his carbon up front and take a lot rather than retain it. When we put all that together in a very brief delivery model, and I appreciate this has been a very top line run through, so I'm happy to answer questions later on. That's what basically our process looks like, from meeting the landowner to getting it in the ground, to delivery, to monitor and maintain the site to make sure the trees grow so the carbon storage occurs. And I'm happy to take any questions. I appreciate that's quite a high level top run through, but James will hopefully be back online and the technical issues resolved, and therefore, you know, some of them holes may be filled in the next few minutes, but happy to answer questions afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Russ. So yeah, technical issues hopefully being resolved. So what can people see? People see the Woodland Carbon Code presentation.
Yes.
Well, I can. But that's a start.
Okay, over to James. James, just shout whenever you need me to.
It's going to be a case of when I nod my head, you hit it. Okay.
Yeah.
That's maybe the best way of doing it. So yeah, once again, I'm still James McDougall. I'm 2 years and half an hour on from where we were last time. Yeah, Russ has basically outlined the issues at the coal face. How do we generate that carbon is what I'm going to look at here. So if you get the first slide, please, Simon. So what we're going to do is explain what the carbon code is, and then just look at the kind of mechanics, the timeline that's involved in terms of moving that right the way through to getting some money in for your carbon. Okay, next one. So the carbon code is essentially a whacking great calculator. What you're doing in that development in terms of the land, the operations that are involved, any returns you're going to get from that development, and any money that you are going to get in from third parties is all part of the process in giving you a number of units that your development will produce over a given period of time. Now, you can download this Woodland Carbon Code from the internet. You can either use this code, this link, or if you Google it, make sure that you download the April edition, because I think the previous edition is still on there, and there are some sort of subtle changes. Okay, Simon? And again, so there are 4 elements, there are 4 clicks, I think, Simon, to the Woodland Carbon Code. What is it? Well, it's basically a standard. It's an assurance standard that what you're doing is correct. It gives you some guidance in terms of the mechanics of that process. Things to bear in mind that it is only applicable to new woodlands, so existing woodlands don't count. And the other thing which is quite unusual for a regulatory code is it's managed by Scottish Forestry, which is part of a government setup. And Scottish Forestry administer that whole process on behalf of the whole of the UK. Okay, I think there are 5 clicks now, Simon. So what's it there to do? It's there to basically ensure a standard. It's there to ensure that there is an accounting process, a carbon accounting process, and that those carbon protocols are scientifically based. It also has a third-party element to it, so your scheme will be independently looked at by 2 organizations at the moment, which we'll go into, and ultimately that process is open and transparent. So whatever you're doing, if it's on the Woodland Carbon Code register, it will be open and transparent for anybody really to go and interrogate at a later date. Okay, next one. So that's the carbon code in a nutshell. If you are desperate for your lunch and that's all you wanted to find out, I would suggest you nip off and put the kettle on. But the next 3 slides are really just to show how that sort of that works in practice, if you like. Okay, next slide. So we start with registration. Next click. So the registration starts before any action starts on the ground, any planting starts. And that's really quite important. It's a very simple, straightforward sort of process. You need a map. You need to do some basic carbon estimations on forms that are already produced, and a little bit of background to what your development is. And that registration is free at that stage. Next click. So there are a couple of provisos for this one. So the area has to be new woodland. So you can't have an area that has been under trees in the past 25 years. It can't be planted on deep peat. So linking back to the FSC and UCWAS. And a little sort of nuance is that you can register these schemes on their own or part of a group scheme, which can be sort of disparate across the country, if you like. They don't need to have a sort of geographic kind of connection. And there are small sort of subtleties in terms of small schemes which will cut through some of this administration process. So if we move on to the planting stage, once your scheme is registered, you can then start the planting. And that planting could be by a number of means. It could be by direct planting, natural regeneration, or direct seeding. And we'll look at a couple of elements of that in a minute. You can also claim grants against that development or bring in other sort of private funding. But there's a little crucial element to this called additionality. And we can look at that just in a wee minute. In terms of the validation, has to be done within 3 years of registration. So the planting needs to be finished and the validation needs to go through. Next click, Simon. So if we look at those two sort of areas, so the minimum density for this planting, be it through natural regeneration or direct seeding or planting, is 400 stems as far as the Woodland Carbon Code is concerned. And this additionality is based on two premises. Woodland Carbon Code will only work if there is a requirement for carbon income. If you are required to do this through any sort of legal requirement, so compensatory planting, it's not eligible. You would be doing that planting anyway. The investment test sort of comes where you're looking at how economic is it to actually do this planting? Do you actually require carbon income to make this process, this development work? It's based on a principle of a 15% shortfall in funding, and it's at that point in time. So whenever this validation is done, you need to show that you require additional income to make that scheme work, that development work. Okay, Simon? So the validation process itself is rather sort of time consuming. Like a lot of these things, there's quite a bit of bureaucracy behind it. And there's a 34-page document called a project design document that needs to be filled in. Once filled in with associated maps and survey reports, it is then sent to an independent validator. Next click, Simon. So there are two currently independent validators, and that's a soil association and organic farmers and growers. And there is a cost at this point. So again, this can be added into your costings, but it's somewhere between 1,100 and 1,400 pounds per validation. So again, the economies of scale start to come in when you're looking at riparian schemes. Small schemes tend not to sort of fit. They maybe fit on a sort of group scheme basis, but these need to be sort of factored in as your development progresses. Next one, Simon. So what does that validation do? The validation basically allows or confirms rather what you have said you are going to do actually corresponds to a number of carbon units, or essentially what the trees that you're putting in the ground will achieve over a given period of time. And that's normally up to 100 years as far as the Woodland Carbon Code's concerned, based on sort of native trees. It can be up to 100 years. More commercial plantations could be 40, 50 years. But again, what it's doing is it's confirming that your promise to deliver a certain number of carbon units is up to scratch. it is what you are doing will actually achieve what you said you're going to do. What it'll do is it'll give you a number. It'll give you a number of what they call pending issuance units. And 1 PIU, pending issuance units, relates to 1 ton of carbon sequestered over that given period of time. Okay, Simon? There's a cost at this point when the units are validated of 10 pence per unit. So it's not a huge amount, but again, you just need to sort of bear that in mind. Okay, once your trees are in the ground, it's been validated and they're growing away quite happily. That's where this second sort of independent assessment of how they're doing sort of kicks in. And this is a process that will continue throughout the 100-year lifetime of the Woodland Carbon Code agreement. After the first 5 years, it's basically looked at to make sure that A, the trees are there, you know, they haven't all disappeared. The fences are intact. You know, what you've said you were going to do has actually been done. So at year 5, it's independently verified to say, yep, it's all looking fine. The units that we said that the developer has said are likely to mature. And that process is basically continued on 10-year cycles thereafter. Okay, Simon? Again, there's a cost because you're employing these independent validators, and that cost is around about, well, £1,600 to about £2,100 at the moment. So you can see over the lifetime of the scheme, if it's 100 years, you're probably looking at around about £20,000 cost to the developer over that given period of time. Okay, next one, Simon. So that's the verification cycles. So year 5 and then 15, 25, right the way through to the 100-year or the contract end. Okay, next one. So essentially what they're doing is at that verification is saying, okay, out of all of the PIUs that have been assigned to this particular project, a certain number of those PIUs have actually turned into carbon. They have gone from that small tree to a slightly larger tree, to a slightly larger tree, so a larger tree. So it's basically assessing how much carbon has actually been produced, as opposed to this pending issuance, this promise to deliver. Next one. And those PIUs will continue to convert from the pending issuances to actual carbon over the lifetime of that particular development. Okay. And like everything in life, there's a little charge for that every single time those units are changed from a PIU to a woodland carbon unit. Okay, Simon. That's a quick trot. I mean, each stage is nuanced. Each stage, you know, there are elements, and even after 2 years of me doing it, there are still little quirks that come up, which I still have to refer back to the code to actually make sense of. But that's a quick run through of the smokes and mirrors that are involved in producing carbon on a development. Okay, next slide. If you want to contact me, my details are there. At the Woodland Trust, we have our own carbon offer, which I think Lindsay's very kindly going to send to you at the end of this this webinar. We're not a broker. The Woodland Trust basically deals with projects that meet our minimum criteria for woodland development. So in essence, it's best practice. And we will buy carbon units direct from the developer. So if you have any questions on that, when you get it, please get in touch. And as I said earlier, the Woodland Carbon Code is actually available as a PDF. Just make sure that you download the April version, as opposed to probably the first one that comes up on a search if you do Google. So that's it from me. And thank you, Simon, for helping me through that particular problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you very much, Russ. We now got some time for some questions, and I think I forgot to mention who I am. I'm Ruchir Shah. I'm the Director of External Affairs of the Scottish Wildlife Trust, and I am taking a bit of a lead on the Riverwoods Investment Readiness Pioneers project within the overarching Riverwoods initiative itself. So very happy to answer questions on that. There are a number of comments and questions that have been put in the chat as well. I think they've been answered, but I'll just double check that. The first one was from David Tollick, which was a question about crop thinning, which I believe Russ has answered in the chat, that if thinning crop is to be taken, then the carbon broker will work the offer accordingly. And there was also a question from Carolina from Trees as Infrastructure. How are the validation verification fees covered? I think that was also covered by James in his presentation in the towards the end of that diagram. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that? Can I first check with James?
Well, I would just say that the question to Russ about thinning, when I said that the Woodland Carbon Code is a big calculator, you would put all of that information into that calculator before it gave you a number. So it would actually take that into account through the process. So it's really quite important that you have that sort of long-term vision. It can be amended, it can be changed, but it's quite important that you put all of the information that you're doing through that development into the Woodland Carbon Code process early doors.
Great, and Russ, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that. There's an additional question that's come from Carolina that follows that up.
Yeah, I had just started a tight reply to Carolina just when you sort of gone through it. Let me just scroll back down. The original question was something about the validation. Yeah, so there's no straight answer, Carolina, I'm afraid. So basically there are differing offers out there, and in each carbon contract as we work with, it essentially ends up being bespoke for the client that we're dealing with, depending on what they want to do with their carbon units. So an example, if basically that example, it's hard to explain without getting complicated, but if we're selling all up front, if they were selling all up front, then generally the offer that they will see is what they will get, and that will allow for all the fees. If they are retaining some, then there will be, as James has explained, validation and verification fees on top, and that will all be agreed depending on how they're wishing to either sell, retain, or sell percentages thereof of their carbon units. And so some of that may differ. If they're selling 50% up front, then there may be a differing fee structure for the retention and how they wish to manage them, and or others to manage them on their behalf. So every contract will be different, and that's why I say to the landowners and the farmers alike, to say, look, shop around, speak to them, see what offers different people have out there, which ones work best for you, get them to put the fee structures in so you see the whole thing up front. If I was on the examples shown today, we're really just simplifying it because we have 15 minutes to get a little bit of information over. But it's really, you have to work with who the brokers out there to get the contract bespoke to you. And then obviously, yes, you may, depending on how you're setting it up, have to obviously consider the ongoing charges, which, if we go back to the second example, which was only a small scheme, which is probably borderline whether it's really attractive, is 4.5 hectares. The likelihood is that that client there will sell up front because they don't require any offset in the future. They already have that via another woodland in place. It's just essentially, in the way they're considering it at the moment, is it's some extra monies that they can have. They can sell it and put money in, in the bank in that situation. So apologies, Caroline, that's not a straightforward answer, but it's really bespoke every time for the client, and you have to work through them with them. If I was to get into that onto spreadsheets, you'd be showing you spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet of multiple different options depending on what the client's after.
Can I just say that we considered all of this with the Woodland Trust offer, and it does get very complicated. And one of our USPs is that we take on board all of the validation and verification costs and process through the kind of lifetime of the agreement, and that really kind of reflects the type of owners and developers who have this burning desire, but maybe don't have the technical expertise to sort of keep on top, or the inclination to keep on top of these sorts of things. So yeah, as Russ said, other carbon offers are available, but you know, it is horses for courses.
Thanks, James. Just a reminder that if you would like to ask a question, then you can put your hand up by clicking on the reactions button underneath. But while we're waiting for any of those to come through, we do have a question from Nicola Melville from SEPA. To what extent can you take account of carbon sources specific to Riverwoods, for example, in the Riverwoods materials? I guess this is about differentiation attribution. Who would like to take that, James or Russ?
I'll give it to Russ.
Sorry, Ruchir, you're going to have to repeat that, please.
Of course, yeah, it's in the chat. It's to what extent can you take account of carbon sources that are specific to Riverwoods, for example, in the Riverwood material?
Are we talking about in terms of the where the storage is?
Nicola, do you want to clarify?
I think
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, when we were doing the research and the evidence review, it was clear that one of the differences between Riverwoods and a standard wood is you have the woody material that falls into the river and it stays there. So large wood material is an element of a riverwood, sort of integral element. And the research was showing that was kind of slower to break down than sometimes you would get if it was just falling on the floor of the forest. And I just wondered, yes, it's a carbon store. I just wondered, is that built into what the Woodland Code can consider?
I think it's considered in the round rather than anything specific to riparian woodlands. It's a very good point, and I'm happy to take that back to Vicky West, who actually administers the scheme. I think as far as the Woodland Carbon Code is concerned, I don't think I'm talking out of turn, that it's really only now that the science is developing around sort of soil carbon and the impact on the different types of woodlands on soil carbon, whether or not they've actually done or even considered doing anything specific for riparian woodlands. I just don't know. I'm sorry.
Can I invite Vicky, if you're okay to speak? I know you've just put something in the chat, but do you want to come back on that directly?
Yes, if I can work out how to unmute myself on this system. Yeah, so at the moment we only account for live trees, regardless of whether it's a riverwood or any other kind of wood. And we are working on the soil carbon element, or kind of where it goes once the trees die. So I guess there's a potential for including that in future, but at the moment it's only the trees that are alive that we're still counting.
Great, that's really clear.
Another question at the same time was just to check then with Vicky, as sort of the research that Mike Perks has been doing on specific varieties of trees that you might have along a river woodland, is that data also going to be updated in time as well, as we get to understand more about trees and floodplains and on banks?
I probably need to catch up with Mike about what he's doing more recently. We are currently updating the Woodland Carbon Code lookup tables to have a wider range of spacings and a wider range of species, particularly for the broadleaf. So that's Forest Research are doing that, and it's incorporating the best knowledge we have. So I probably need to catch up with Mike though directly if there's anything else that we've got from his work.
Okay, thanks.
I'll just jump in on that as well. I mean, you know, that's sort of widening out that point a little bit. That is something that we come across from a from a design point of view, if there's any practitioners on here who are looking at, you know, actually doing work on the ground, that, you know, you will have to balance up. As I say, there's always compromise to be had. You know, my ideal design for a stretch of you know, river or stream or something like that may not be necessarily what we put in. One, because of the constraints around if we're using the forestry grant scheme and having to tick all the boxes that you have to tick when you go into the forestry grant scheme. And also because sometimes if we are, you know, and whether this is right or wrong, the reality of life on the ground is you have to make the finance work. You know, there may be a case in point, say, so in England where we have more flexibility on what we use, you know, sometimes we might think, well, you know, 800 trees per hectare is absolutely ideal, yeah, but to make, if we're bringing in carbon in, we've got to stack that up and it's affecting the numbers. We might have to uplift the numbers of trees, redesign it somehow to increase the tree numbers just to make the finance work. And that's not necessarily saying that is correct or incorrect either way, but that's some of the practicalities and some of the co-face stuff that you'll have to face on the ground, you know, to make schemes work. So it's a good question to have asked, and it's one to follow and to keep an eye on, because it may have a positive and or negative effect depending on what pans out.
Can I check if anybody else has a question they would like to put? Just while we're waiting for that, James, is there anything you wanted to add to what you've outlined? Any tips?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Vicky, who I only just remembered is on the call, is a wonderful help and resource. You know, if you do need help in working with the Carbon Code, she's probably fed up with me phoning her, but it's once you get your head around it, it's pretty straightforward. There are some nuances that perhaps could be changed, will be changed, I don't know. One of the kind of main drawbacks, I mean, the Woodland Trust just deals with native woodlands, and the carbon calculations, some of the calculations just aren't there for native woodlands. So if you're using ESC, for example, you know, the ESC ecological sites classification yield models are based on sort of timber production. They've been, you know, embellished to take in soil carbon and the impacts of those types of trees. But that's perhaps something that needs to be looked at in more detail, especially, you know, when, as Russ was saying, you know, quite often you have to kind of compromise the proper, you know, the right design to accommodate a kind of a rather sort of bureaucratic system that perhaps shouldn't be the driver. It should be the conservation and the ecological value of these woodlands that is the main driver.
Great. Okay. Well, we're coming towards the end of the webinar now, but we do have an opportunity if anybody else wants to ask any questions. If you need to leave, feel free to leave now. But if you do have a question, feel free to stay on for a couple more minutes. Just before I do that, just to mention that for those that are interested in putting an application in for the Riverwoods Investment Readiness Pioneers for the initial selection process, there is a webinar on the 17th of October now being put on by the Democratic Society, which will run through the console platform. It's fairly straightforward, but if you want some additional support just to see how to do that, feel free to attend that webinar. The details will be circulated post this event and also on the Basecamp for those that are there, and also to anyone that's already registered for support for through an expression of interest for the Riverwoods Investment Readiness Pioneers. Okay, well, I don't think anyone else seems to have any questions, so I think I'm going to leave it there and just thank our presenters, James and Russ, and also thanks to Simon and Lindsay for helping to organize today's session. It is being recorded. It will be available for you to review again later on. And Lindsay, I think we're going to send out the slides as well alongside a link to the recording to people here as well, so they can look back, and because there's quite a lot to process. So hopefully that will be helpful as well. And feel free to circulate that to others as well. So thank you very much for participating in this, and hope to see applications, and hope to see this develop into a thriving set of projects. Thank you.